didn't think I could add that long. So for 17 years, I've been buried in this food safety stuff. And just for that background, we are based here in Orlando, Florida. We opened up a National Restaurant Association office adjacent to Rich's office about 4 years ago. So we get not only be friends, but neighbors, which he often regrets when I go and make him buy lunch for me periodically at Nature's Table. That said, what I wanted to do is talk this morning. I know Rich sent you the document. I hate PowerPoint presentations. They drive me insane. So I'm not going to regurgitate the document, but really kind of give you some basis on some of the thinking behind it, who developed it with us. And the genesis of this really came about a few weeks ago when at the National Restaurant Association, we realized that states were starting to actively talk about reopening, particularly for restaurants, lodging facilities, and that the states needed at least some element of guidance. And so this really was what we built, was guidance, recognizing that we had to cover 50 very unique states and then a variety of kind of operating businesses. But the one thing that we've pushed, because we've used this, in fact, just yesterday I was on a call with Kay Hutchinson, the governor of Alabama, because I've discovered that government officials tend not to realize that the food and beverage and the restaurant industry has already been highly regulated for decades. Everybody operates under the U.S. Food Code, which really already covers a big part of what food and beverage and restaurant facilities need to do to keep customers and to keep employees safe. So as we begin to push that, we've shared with folks that really most places are 80% of the way there, even in this COVID-19 world. And so what we try to do is reinforce the message of the food code in this document, and then also begin to take a look at that 20% and address some of the new things we have to do, like enhanced sanitation techniques, the social distancing, obviously, increased personal hygiene. But we didn't want to do it alone. You know, we recognize that we've got some great people at the National Restaurant Association we can call on, but we thought it was a good time for public-private partnership. And so we called on help. We had two senior level executives from the Food and Drug Administration, Frank Yanis, who is the Deputy Commissioner for Public or Food Policy for the FDA, Mark Morman, who is the Head of Food Safety for the Food and Drug Administration. We brought two top people about academia, one from North Carolina State University, the other one from Rutgers. That's right, Rich, it was Rutgers, not Michigan State or Michigan, it was Rutgers. Rich can explain that to you. And then we also had folks from public health. We wanted to get a balance of people that could give us kind of the top end science and then vet it in the industry. And so in essence, what we ended up doing was just that. You know, we reminded everybody one more time that the food code focuses on prohibiting sick employees in the workplace. That was a lot of concern we were hearing from people, was what do we do with people who are coming in who are ill? You know, the strict hand washing policies, wearing gloves, you know, and then enhancing that, the cleaning and sanitizing. You know, making sure that the person in charge has a food safety manager certification, and, you know, making sure that person's on site. And so we took that as the basis and then said, okay, what else do we have to do? And again, so that is where we built on all the document to really take a look at what employers have to do, the basics of food safety, and that's already there. And the FDA has already shown that the virus doesn't come from food. The virus comes from person-to-person transmission. Then we took a look at what has to happen with employee health and personal hygiene. And one of the questions I've been asked a lot is, why didn't we mandate temperature taking? And we're leaving that up to individuals to decide whether or not they want to take a person's temperature. But as we talked to CDC and FDA, one of the things we learned is that if you don't know how to operate these distance thermometers, or there's all kinds of different kinds of thermometers, how you take temperatures, things that I never knew about before, exactly where you take the temperature is critical. If someone's coming in from outdoors and there's an ambient temperature change, you don't mitigate that. Somebody might come in from the cold, or they're coming in from very hot, that's on the skin. A lot of factors. And so we said it's an option, but make sure you learn how to do it before you do it. One of the things we're working on now internally at the Restaurant Association is coming up with a checklist that people can use. So it's a pre-work checklist just to ask the questions to make sure somebody's not sick. But again, we go back to the basics with the restaurant industry and the food and beverage industry, that, you know, sick people aren't supposed to be in a dining facility. And we're ensuring that basic goes forward. The next big thing we had was social distancing. And one of the questions we had that came up yesterday in my call was, what about buffets? And I think that's got to be big for the lodging industry. And we talked about that at length. We kind of pushed a little bit further in our recommendations than what the FDA does. And I think, you know, particularly, Rich, for your organization, I think if you're influencing the thinking of government, FDA has said no buffets of any kind. we have said, okay, buffet, as you always know it, probably isn't the best thing because you don't want multiple hands on utensils, the proximity of people. I'm not even sure sneeze guards are going to be safe at this point, but we said if you're going to have it, at least have that there, but then do cafeteria style. Our feeling is that if you can have a worker who is actually serving the food, if you distance the people that 6 feet as they're in line and you avoid people cloistered getting into line, that you should have a safe experience. And so we did actually kind of break from the FDA a little bit in our guidance to say, we understand what the FDA is saying, and we always told people this is what the FDA says, but if you put these practices in place, this should make a difference. Another area that we had a lot of discussion about was the use of face coverings. A lot of confusion in the marketplace. Obviously, at the initial stage of this, CDC said face coverings weren't of any value because it didn't keep you from getting COVID-19, and that hasn't changed. But what they are saying now is the problem with asymptomatic individuals. You don't know they have it, they're not running a fever, they're not showing any symptoms, but they have it, and then just simple conversation can spread COVID-19. And so now they're saying the face coverings have tremendous value in keeping you from giving the virus to somebody else. And so face coverings became a big part of our conversation, recognizing that oftentimes back of the house, 6 feet of separation is difficult. And for us, particularly in the restaurant industry, recognizing that you can be dealing anything from quick serve to casual to fine dining, there's all kinds of different facilities out there. I talked to some of our members who are in old buildings in big cities where 6 feet of separation almost anywhere is almost impossible. And this is where we made the recommendation that face coverings be utilized. And we want to emphasize too, from an industry perspective, there's still a lot of emphasis that the surgical masks, and particularly the N95 masks, need to be saved for medical personnel and first responders. And we certainly didn't want to be out there pushing something that was going to put any of those folks at risk. And recognizing that CDC guidance, and there's a whole series they have now on cleaning and sanitizing face coverings, the cloth face coverings to keep you from spreading the virus would be sufficient. And it also helps in those closed environments. And so again, face coverings then became a big piece of our discussion around the social distancing, recognizing that passing in hallways could be a challenge, serving people could be a challenge. Limiting the amount of time that waitstaff spends with guests, obviously it's not exactly what the spirit of hospitality is all about, but we recognize that perhaps it's just delivering the dishes, not coming back every few minutes and asking how things are, and perhaps waiting till the guests exit before you clear the tables, a lot of those suggestions. But I think the most important part of us developing this guidance is where it's going. We don't know what's next with the COVID-19 virus, and we're learning every day. I think one of the great things for the Restaurant Association that has come out of this is we're developing a strong public-private partnership with the Food and Drug Administration. I'm now on calls weekly with the FDA. They've got some new guidance, actually have a new checklist coming out because they did play a strong role in the development of our guidance. A checklist that kind of matches what the guidance says, and they're going to have it up on their website. I had the call with them on Tuesday. They're hoping to have it up today, but if not today, again, it's all things government has to go through their clearances, but they expect to have something out very, very shortly here. But that'll allow people now, as they begin to reopen food and beverage facilities, to go through and understand what they need to do, what those checklists need to be, whether it's been closed, you need to go through a deep cleaning just as a safety factor, making sure that if you've had foodstuffs stored that you're checking dates and times, because it's still a food safety issue as well as it is a health and safety issue. Checking on your employees, it's making sure that you've got things planned for social distancing, so no congregating. And again, it was a challenge for us. When we first did this, we were looking at the White House guidelines, which had the 3 phases and had what they thought were the numbers of people that should be in each of those phases that could be grouped together at any one time. And then we discovered that after that started, the state started adjusting that. So we had to pull out of the 3 White House phases and do this in a more general response. But rather than go through everything bit by bit, I think the easier thing to me to do, Aaron and Rich, would probably be to answer questions for people in terms of how we got to this. And what I was getting ready to say a moment ago, this is an iterative document. And so one of the things we thought at the Restaurant Association right from the beginning is as we learn more, working with the FDA, working with the CDC, as we begin to open and see what happens to the viral transmission, does it go up, does it go down, does it stay on some plateau, will help us decide what we have to do. And then as states make decisions in terms of opening, what else can we do with that guidance? And we do expect that there may be things coming down the road here that we're going to have to anticipate. I've been hearing rumblings. People have called me that there may be an issue in being able to get hand sanitizer. So once we begin to see the availability of some supplies like hand sanitizer, what the options are, we knew early on that there were alternatives for cleaning and sanitation, that CDC early on recommended that if you can't get a good sanitizer, and this was before EPA came out with their recommendations, that you could use a quart of water to 4 teaspoons of bleach. But now EPA has come out with their recommended supplies, and they're working with all the suppliers to make sure that what you have will effectively kill the COVID-19 virus. So with that, Rich, I'll open up to questions, and then Erin, are you going to throw the questions at me, or?
Yes, so we have our first question up there, and just again, a reminder, please type in any questions you have in that chat box, and then I will read them out for Larry. So question number 1 is, what do you see happening for limited service hotels with a complimentary buffet breakfast?
Well, and I think that comes back to the buffet question. And again, it's going to depend on what local officials do. This is our big concern right now, is that if they stick with the FDA guidance says no buffets. The suggestion may be, rather than doing a buffet, is just do a cafeteria style. You know, I don't want to say to call it a buffet, because if people are in lines or where they're standing, you know, it's keeping people socially distanced. I think the idea behind a buffet is that people are serving themselves. I think if you eliminate the self-service, you don't have people handling utensils, that people are still distanced, and if they're in line, but then someone else can place the food on the tray and then get it to the table, then I think you should be okay. But it's one of those cases where people are going to have discussions with their local leaders to make sure that's approved. It was a big discussion in our call yesterday with Alabama in terms of making how that was going to work. I know one of our board members comes from Golden Corral, and he and I talked about this at length, because obviously that has a big impact on their business, but they're prepared to shut down their buffets and move to a cafeteria style just to make sure that they're meeting the demand. And that's one of the reasons that we thought the cafeteria style, our guidance, would be effective.
That makes sense, and I think there's some added thought that each of you have to do if you offer that as one of your amenities within your property. Do we have another question, Erin?
So far, that is the only one that we've received.
Rich, I've never known you and your group to be this quiet.
It must be because of our happy hour last night.
Ours or yours?
Both for me, yeah. And I understand many of you were on the Skull happy hour last night too. So I would suspect that some of you are feeling the effects of both of those. Any other questions for Larry? He is a world expert on this topic.
I have one.
Please.
So it's in the governor's executive order in phase 1, capacity is limited to 25%. Any insight as to a date when the capacity limit will be increased?
I think everyone's using what they call that gating theory, that they would watch certain practices and certain changes coming in the virus itself, and if they see a leveling or a decrease in infections, that they'll probably make the changes. One of the reasons that we moved away from phasing was because there was a lot of confusion about the gating concept. So it's all going to be based on everything and we've said the same thing. What I keep hearing is it's all going to be data-based. We're trying to do the exact same thing. We don't want to be out there guessing. So we're watching what the agencies do and staying in contact with them. Erin, I did want to add too, from Rich, because obviously we have a relationship that goes back a long, long time, is that I will continue to share with CFHLA the information that we get. So certainly, Rich, will be keeping your members apprised of what's happening even at a national level. And Erin, the other piece that becomes a challenge with this too, and this makes it a little bit harder for me, is it's not just Florida based, but obviously we're trying to address 50 different states and a variety of different eating establishments. But again, part of what I want people to do is use this, which is where it was very advantageous yesterday in Alabama, to influence their government officials. And so if everything isn't in place yet in Orange County, then maybe there's an opportunity still to talk to the mayor and talk to others, just to make sure that if there's more restrictive policies in place that aren't going to work, but that you can make work for your facilities, it's a good chance to say, here's some science-based data that you can use as something that would be an effective way of influencing politics.
Thank you. Okay, next question. We have, what are your thoughts on menus?
So what we've been suggesting two things. Paper menus probably being the best that are disposable, but we've also said that if you've got the higher level, high-end menus, they need to be sanitized. And I think that's part of the enhanced sanitation efforts, where in the past, people would just wipe down the tables. Now, obviously you have to, and of course I do want to emphasize too, with sanitizing that you're not touching food contact surfaces. I've seen some crazy things out there that people are doing with food after they go shopping based on YouTube videos that they see. You want to get somebody sick, that's a great way to do it, is let it touch chemicals. But that said, tabletops, condiments, menus, chairs, crash bars on doors. I mean, be thinking about the kinds of sanitizing you're doing, the frequency. Basically, if somebody's touching it, you need to sanitize it, with the exception of food, but everything else just needs to be sanitized on a regular basis.
So kind of to piggyback off of that, our next question was suggestions for handling tabletop condiments. Is that sanitizing? Should we go to individual packaging, place and remove as needed?
I think it depends on your operation. In the case of places that are just used to having the tabletop condiments and it's effective, they need to be cleaned. Obviously, if, at the very least between guests. If they are the type that you can use that are disposable and it works in your operation, then disposable works. We've talked about the same thing in certain restaurants, and particularly when it came to the cafeteria style, is rather than having people pick up their plates and their forks and knives and spoons as they get in line, it is preset. Perhaps it's wrapped in a napkin and is preset at the table. So it's changing paradigms a lot. But we're recommending that obviously that people do what works best for their restaurants, but everything has to be tied to that enhanced cleaning and sanitation.
And relating to bar stools, are bar stools allowed if they are the 6 feet apart?
Another great question. That came up yesterday as well. We're not getting clear guidance yet on the separation of bars and restaurants. We did try to make the argument yesterday, and that's something we've been pushing, that if a bar is part of a restaurant establishment, that indeed, that 6 foot separation. I think where it's going to be, here's another challenge that we're going to have to think through, and we were talking about yesterday, is in some cases they're measuring the square footage of a property and then making a determination of the public space, and say you can only have so many people in a facility, but then they're not counting the people who are back of the house. And so suddenly you may have another 200 square feet back of the house and 10 people back there, but when it gets lumped in, suddenly your employees can't work. So that 6 feet of separation, the number of people that you can have standing in those locations, and I think that's what right now government's most concerned about, is that you have people standing around, and when they congregate, they get in larger groups, and they get in larger groups, you have risk of transmission. So we have said, as long as your seating is 6 feet apart, and if you look in the guidance, and we don't talk bars specifically, but we do talk about that separation of seat to seat rather than table to table, but seat to seat being 6 feet.
And relating to table and chair cleaning, what changes do you see coming with that? Is that in between each guest?
Our recommendation is in between each guest. We can do all the checks we can in terms of our employees to make sure that our employees are healthy, that those who may be sick are staying home. And that's traditional. I mean, that's nothing new. We don't want sick employees in food establishments. But because of the asymptomatic transmission of this disease, the recommendation is between guests, absolutely clean those guest touch areas.
And then this question, I think what they are saying is, what about the restaurant and bar staff handling glasses and then handing them over to the guest? Would you recommend, I guess, a gloved, any change out your gloves after every touch point, every individual?
Yeah, this is going to be, I think, a change in habit, because I think we have a tendency to wear gloves a little bit longer than we should sometimes. And I've often had to remind people when I'm out that the gloves are there to protect me, not your hands. But yes, I think the gloved hands obviously is the best way to go in terms of sharing that, and then removing the gloves and changing them. But let's not forget too, the frequency of washing hands. The key is you could touch something and perhaps the virus is on it. As long as you wash your hands, thoroughly wash your hands for the 20 seconds and don't touch your mouth, your nose, or your eyes, your risk of catching the virus is extremely low. And so again, the gloves are a great way to avoid that. But I want to emphasize the fact that if employers can make hand washing stations, they can make the bathrooms, the restrooms available to the employees, and then encourage them to frequently wash their hands. And the hardest thing we do, I'm really bad at it, is not doing this, not rubbing your eyes. It is a very hard habit to break, but it's one of those things that I think we're going to have to instruct people on a regular basis.
And I guess this is kind of a question related to limited service properties who don't have the layout or structure set up to have someone serve from a buffet for their breakfast, where that may be more against the wall. What are your recommendations? Would that be pre-packaging in to-go containers?
I mean, one of the things I did here is that people were going to be treating that more as the takeout structure. And so it's like the boxed lunch and you're going to have it there. You can pick it up. You know, again, if you're going to let them sit and eat, if you want to preset tableware, if you want to have plastic wrapped in napkins, however you want to do that. But again, seating still has to be separated. The social distancing has to take place. And then again, if we do this right, you know, the reports I was reading this morning, CDC hasn't updated anything today, but the reports I was reading this morning indicate that the social distancing is working. And so we can maintain that and then just keep that. I think we'll begin to see things open up a little bit faster. I hope to see things open up a little bit faster, and then it becomes less restrictive going forward.
We had just a comment saying that the idea of the cafeteria style, we hope that Orange County will adopt that for the buffets and banquets. Let's see, we have one. Concerns with beverage stations. So those freestyle Coke machines, self-service coffee, etc. How do you see that moving forward?
Yeah, and it's in our documentation there. We said at this stage, we're seeing that, and the FDA has been very strong on that one, is not having any of those self-service stations available. You shouldn't be able to pick up straws. You shouldn't be able to go in, you know, where have lemons sitting out, or you can fill your own drink. It may go back to a cafeteria style, have a staff person that's there that can fill the glasses, hand you a straw, hand you a lemon, gloved hands, changing gloves, washing hands. I think you almost treat that as you would treat the buffet. And again, I think what we've been trying to emphasize in these alternatives is that FDA, and we're having a lot of discussion. We just on Tuesday had this discussion with Mark about it. Is trying to find a way to say, if restaurants have alternatives, can we loosen up this guidance a little bit? And that's where we've come back and said, come up with these additional steps to avoid the risk to people. And that's where we said, again, FDA is saying none. We keep pushing government not to go completely with FDA. In some cases, we're winning those arguments. But it's going to be incumbent on the industry to make sure they're doing everything they can to protect people. And again, having someone serve is the better way to do it than serving it yourself.
What are your recommendations on refills? New glasses each time, no refills? Is that going to pose any?
I mean, again, it's if the person. This is about transmission. So if I'm a consumer and I'm sitting at the table and I finish my drink and I want to get up and I need to get it refilled, if I tend to bring it back and you know the employee's wearing a face covering, you know, it may be one of those where the employee can get a fresh glass. They've got a separate container to put the old glass. I would definitely do a new glass. I wouldn't try and refill an old one. You want to limit those touch points. But obviously the employee in that particular case is going to be critical to making sure that that experience stays safe.
Relating to disposable utensils, the glassware, napkins, etc., do you think that is necessary?
I think it depends on your type of operation. If you're able to move it, if you're able to get it out, remember, you know, the cleaning and sterilizing, the cleaning equipment is hot enough that it's able to kill the virus. I did get that from the FDA. So as long as you're running it through a sterilizing system, you should be fine. And so it really depends on your operation. If you don't have the kind of operation that can take it to that point where it's sterilized, then obviously you do need to move to something that's disposable. Again, the whole idea here is to reduce the person-to-person transmission risk. So if you don't have touch points, if you have anything that keeps people from, you know, necessarily transmitting the disease, then I think you've done the right thing. And it, again, just depends on your back of the house operation to support that.
Now this question, with the 6-foot distances, the seat to seat, table to table, however we are setting that up, how do you accommodate for families that are then dining?
So that's one of the tough ones we've talked about is, and again, we haven't seen a problem with families sitting together unless, of course, the government has said, you know, it's suddenly a family of 15 and the family has said 10, you may have to separate and do a 10 and 5. And just figure out the families together, I think, aren't the risk as much as it is making sure that family of 15 doesn't transmit the virus to somebody sitting close by. And so that's the idea of limiting the groups. I think the easiest way to do that is just for the families to recognize they're going to have to make some shifts to be able to do that effectively. The other piece, and I meant to mention this before, is some of the creativity too with what people are doing in some of their seating. So we say the 6 feet table to table, but we know a lot of folks also have booths. And some of the folks I've been talking about creating perhaps wooden or plexiglass barriers between the booths that could be temporary. And I will tell you that the entrepreneurs are coming out of the woodwork. I'm sure your members are hearing from them. I'm getting a multitude of emails every day with everybody their new ideas. So I think one of the interesting things that's going to come out of this when it's all done is a lot of very creative and innovative ways to separate people that people can look at. But I have been hearing booth separation by plexiglass, booth separation by other kinds of barriers. So again, the options are there. The 6 foot is the viral transmission. And I don't even want to get into that because I've heard all kinds of different reports on viral transmission from 3 feet, which is a World Health Organization study from '84, to a CDC executive who used melon seed spitting as an example of what you could do, who pushed it out to 26 feet. So this is a guide. This is what I keep emphasizing to folks. This is the guide that we're looking at here. And the idea is to figure out what are we doing to mitigate the risk of transmission.
And we have another question that came through. How would you suggest we handle the in-room dishware for the suites or more of those vacation ownership style rooms that have those kitchens? Is washing in the dishwasher enough to kill and sanitize, or does something else need to be done?
One we haven't addressed. That's a great question. I don't know the temperature of the dishwashing. You're trusting at that point a guest. I think there's less that this is my guess here. There's less you have to do to worry about mitigating the transmission of the virus from family to within a family. So for example, if I'm here in my kitchen doing dishes, my wife does the dishes and it goes to the dishwasher. If I do them, we're both eating off of that same thing. I do think though that between guests, now you have a responsibility to pull and perhaps take them down and do them in a commercial dishwasher. I don't know the internal temperature, so I don't want to speak to that on a basic dishwasher in a location. But again, the idea here is guest to guest, employee to guest, guest to employee transmission that we're trying to mitigate.
And then max table size for family. So would that be, because there is still that 10 person, could you say a family of 10 could be seated together, or are there any stricter rules on how many constitutes a family in a table setting?
Everything I've seen coming out of the government so far isn't differentiating families from groups of guests. They're just putting it as a raw number. And with that raw number, they're just saying, you figure it out. And so the upside is it does leave it to the discretion of the operator to decide, okay, this family is together, they're going to sit together. I think what we have to be paying attention to is the big number itself. You don't know who's going to get out and decide to be the self-policeman and go out and start reporting people because a group is together. But the fact is, if it's 10, if it's 20, whatever the government comes out with is what I think we have to stick with. The upside is I do think they're trying to give enough flexibility to recognize that. And again, like I shared earlier, sometimes that flexibility is backfiring in cases where they're using square footage as an example. And that actually came to me from McDonald's because they actually had to, for a day, let an entire staff go because the measurement was wrong. They either had to have this many people in the front of the house ordering and nobody in the back cooking, or we got it fixed. But like I said, sometimes these things go out with the best of intentions, and then when it shows up from an operating side, doesn't work. And so this is where we all have to begin to raise the questions that it was a great idea in its essence, but it's not working now.
Okay, we just had one more come through. So similar to the question regarding the glassware inside the suites, what are your thoughts on the coffee makers? At least initially, should those coffee makers be removed due to all the touch and the cleaning procedures, or can they be kept?
I would say if the housekeepers, again, this is going to be the cleaning and sanitizing, any high touch surface. And obviously we're not on the lodging side, so we haven't addressed, the elements of in-room. We're really talking about restaurants themselves. But I think if we go back to the basics of high touch surfaces, if I'm, thinking of myself as a guest and having worked in the hotel industry, there's a lot of high touch surfaces, but this is going to be between guests more than it is going to be while the guests are there. And then just making sure that the sanitizers are effective. I do want to add, EPA has identified the kinds of sanitizers that are effective in fighting COVID-19. Your supplier, Cintas, Ecolab, whoever it may be, can certainly advise you on what those best sanitizers are and how to use them. There are effective ways of using them. And I come back to the kitchen again, just to make sure I keep emphasizing this. One, talk to your manufacturers, talk to your suppliers, because the kinds of materials that are in your kitchens can sometimes be damaged by certain kinds of sanitizers. So ask them how to use them, and emphasize the kitchen staff, because if they start getting aggressive, that's a good thing. The bad thing is they start touching food contact surfaces. You're going to have people getting sick, and that's another issue you're going to have to address.
Larry, do you have an opinion on the effectiveness of electrostatic machines?
Well, as Rich will tell you, I have a lot of opinions.
Do you have one that you can share with the group?
I'm not that familiar with electrostatic machines, but I will do some homework on it and get back to Rich and let you know.
Thank you. What about the check presenters and pens? So your thoughts on when the guest receives the bill, are we signing? If there's a machine to be brought to the table?
We're obviously very hardly emphasizing the contactless payment systems as much as you possibly can. If you can find, obviously, if you have to use a pen, and I just did this the other day where I had to purchase something, and I was very impressed. The gentleman came out, he had a sanitary wipe that he used. That's what I handed him, my credit card. That's what he used to put in the credit card machine. He wiped down the pen. I signed it. I handed the pen back. He had it in the sanitizer, pulled my card out using the sanitizing wipe. It was laborious, but it was effective, and I appreciated him doing that. But obviously, contactless is the way to go, the best option. If you can't do it, then continue to think about touch surfaces, and just making sure they're being cleaned and sanitized, even if it's something as simple as that wipe. And again, the other thing we're talking about here is these are all obvious things that guests are going to see, because the challenge that we're all having, whether it's on the hotel and lodging side or on the restaurant side, is rebuilding confidence in consumers that we're doing everything we can to keep them safe. And so where before these practices might have seemed a little bit onerous, I think people appreciate that now, and because it says not only what you're doing in front of the house, but it also sends a message about what you're doing back to the house. And that confidence is what is going to begin to bring consumers back.
So then the next question we had, which is probably similar to what you just said. In your opinion, where do you feel the line will be in regards to hotels, restaurants being perfectly sanitary and guests accepting risk and going back out to eat and staying in a hotel?
I just answered that ahead of time.
Yep. Yep. That's what I say. That probably, I don't know if you had any additional, but I think your comments
that really is it. And we're struggling with that. I was on a call last week, and that was the big part of the discussion is, what do we do? As the Restaurant Association, we are working right now on a campaign as we build more of our toolkits, but we are beginning to build a confidence building campaign that we get out into the marketplace, and things will reassure consumers about the safety of the restaurants. We've added free training. Our food handler training from ServSafe is free for the month of May, so it's still good until the end of May. So much so that our servers have gone down the last couple of days. So many people have signed on to take it. And I will add this, because I know this is always a concern in Florida. From a licensing perspective, the ServSafe program isn't accepted in Florida. Florida Restaurant and Lodging Associations is. But if somebody just needs a free primer on food safety from a food handler perspective, our program's out there and it's free right now, because I think there's no better time now, particularly if we've had staff who's furloughed, haven't been in the kitchen for a while, if we haven't been doing takeout, haven't been doing delivery, then indeed an opportunity to get that quick refresher on food safety doesn't hurt.
And Larry, where can they access that free training?
Servsafe.com, SERVSAFE.com.
And Aaron, may I ask you, please, let's get that in today's Back of the House.
Of course.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have 5 minutes before we have to conclude. Last questions?
So we have one more question that came through. Larry, do you have thoughts on the use of ultraviolet lights for sanitization?
That's something that FDA and CDC are actually looking at right now. My call with FDA this week is the effectiveness of ultraviolet light on the virus and on surfaces as well. Hopefully in our next set of guidance that we'll have more information on that. I'm waiting to see what FDA pushes back to me this week, but that was one of 4 topics that we addressed with them on Tuesday.
Okay, we got a couple more that came through. What are your thoughts on bar drink garnishes?
I would look at that as pretty much the same as the self-serve drink stations. You don't want people touching them. If you've got the condiments out there, I would say if you have to have the condiments out there, make sure the bartender is the one who's handling them and they're disposed of after every drink.
And then what do you see for timing on when this food safety classes might change with some more pertinent information to COVID-19 specific?
We're working on it now, and I can't give an exact date because when our learning and development team starts, we kind of hold our breath until they can get it done. We've got some great subject matter experts that have already volunteered. They're already reached out to them, so I suspect that the information is going to be extraordinarily relevant and good. And again, I'll keep Rich and you informed of anything that changes we have as we go forward with that.
Thank you. We'll take this as our last question of the morning, and that is, most of the recommendations for additional restaurant and hotel sanitization efforts will all likely result in additional costs to the hotels and restaurants. Is there any indication that consumers will be willing to accept this additional cost so that it can be passed along, or are owners expected to bear the burden in a business with limited margins as is?
Great question. I think the thing that's going to be, we're addressing first, we've asked ourselves the same question, is rebuilding the confidence just to come back. And we know, I mean, it's the same thing we're doing as a national association right now, is there's a lot of cost we're eating, but we recognize that we've got to build confidence. But I think, whatever new normal is going to look like, there may be opportunity there. I think certainly public support that we've seen for restaurants has been extraordinarily strong. We did a campaign with Guy Fieri a few weeks ago as part of our our rescue fund for employees that met with tremendous success. I think it's going to be a matter of what if we can get people back and get them confident to come back to hotels, to get them to come back to eat, to come back to restaurants. Then I can think we can begin to figure out what the math looks like. And I would tell you, as a national organization, we're struggling with that and trying to figure out what that looks like, but we're going to bite the bullet for right now because we know what's the right thing to do. And then once we come back, then we can figure out how to make the math work.
Wonderful. Well, Larry, I'll let Rich officially close us out, but I want to say personally thank you. I think that this was really informational. I have recorded your portion of the speaking so that if any of the membership who were unable to be on this call, we can get that out to them, including these questions, which were very valuable as well. Rich?
And again, I want to remind everybody that this list was forwarded. This list will be on our CFHLA website today. There will be links to that from the back of the house today. I want to thank Larry Lynch for his knowledge, his protection of our industry, and for all the extra efforts he's putting forth to be able to give us this valuable, very valuable information. I suspect because of our friendship, at some later date, if needed, I would hope that Larry would return if we need to do another Zoom call once, to use Larry's term, the new normal is established, and we will be able to utilize Larry's expertise to pass that on. In closing, I do want to say, if you're unaware of it, starting this weekend is National Travel and Tourism Week. I think that's somewhat ironic with everything going on, but our national offices are promoting that, and you will see that also in today's back of the house. Larry Lynch, let's give a silent round of applause to Larry for a job well done. Thank you, Larry.
And Rich, if I can, before I go, just one thing real quick. I just wanted to share with your members that one of the things that we have at Rotary every Wednesday is Rich has a tendency to sneak out early, claiming that he has CFHLA meetings, which we all know better.
I have meetings every Wednesday.
But as Rich sneaks out the door, if everyone can join, the one thing we all say is, "Bye, Rich."
Thanks.
Thanks to all of you. We really appreciate the time. And like I said, we may be the National Restaurant Association, but we have lots of things in common. We'll certainly be happy to share with everybody.
Excellent.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you all.